let me ask you something that should make every Nigerian sit up straight in their chair right now. Where on earth is Asari Dokubo?
Hold it there, Mr. Broadcaster. Yes, the question you asked is a very vital question indeed, which requires an answer. Anyway, the answer to your question is Asari Dokubo have disappeared. And according to many quarters, this message is from yesterday, 5 hours ago, that message published on this YouTube. And I can tell you this for free of charge, that Asari Dokubo have been captured. By who? Some quarters say men on the ground. Some quarters say men from outside the ground. You know what I mean when I say men from outside the ground? I don't want to mention some names because for security reasons, it's still allegedly. But the guy who posted this message is kind of an investigative journalist. Let me put it that way, an investigative journalist. So he gets first-hand information on things that is happening in that middle belt. Sorry, in that Niger Delta, which is the south-south region according to them. But let me not dwell on that. Let us just listen and listen very carefully. The analytical move from this our brother by name also the Obi Clementi Inspiration. This message have gone viral 5 hours ago, and it generated over 6,700 and something views, over 35 comments, 125 likes. So you can as well agree with me that this message, I will not waste most of your time because don't complain say I talk too much. In fact, at this point I know they talk again. Make I just listen, okay? Anybody who will come again and tell me, oh, you never take anything, you just play other people's record. By that time, if I have anything to say, then I will say it then. Or the complaints that I talk too much, right? No problem. Or I can play on record now, since that is what you people want.
Because the same man who built his entire reputation on muscle, guns, and the threat of violence, the same man who told anyone willing to listen that his fighters were ready, trained, and armed to deal with threats in the Niger Delta, that same man is nowhere to be found, while the communities in his own backyard are burning, while families are being snatched from their homes in the dead of night, while forest zones in Ikwere land have been turned into military camps by heavily armed gunmen who are operating with a boldness that suggests they are not afraid of anyone, including the government. This is not a small story. This is not some distant conflict happening in a faraway place that does not touch your life. This is happening right next to Port Harcourt International Airport, one of the most strategic pieces of infrastructure in the entire south-south region of Nigeria. And the man who always had something to say, the man who always had a threat to issue, the man who told us he would fight and die for his people, is missing, completely gone from public view, silent as a stone. Today, we are going to dig into this story properly. We are going to look at what is actually happening on the ground in Rivers State, specifically from the Ikwere communities, describing a situation that has deteriorated so badly that the people who live there are now describing it as a full-scale occupation. Not an occupation by a foreign army, but by heavily armed criminal elements, by gunmen who have essentially moved into the forest areas surrounding several communities and turned those forests into bases of operation. We are talking about forests that were once familiar territory for farmers, hunters, and local people going about their daily lives. Today, those same forests are dangerous no-go zones. People are afraid to enter them. Farmers have abandoned their farms. The economic livelihood of entire communities is being disrupted and destroyed, not by any government policy, not by any natural disaster, but by armed groups that have decided they own the land and everyone in it. The scale of what has been described by community leaders and political commentators is genuinely alarming. These are not small groups of petty criminals carrying locally made rifles. Reports describe armed men in large numbers carrying sophisticated weapons that would not look out of place in a military arsenal. These are people who are organized. They have hierarchies. They have communication systems. They have supply lines. You do not just wake up one morning and establish a fortified base in a forest without planning, without resources, and without some level of either protection or tolerance from powerful interests. That is something that anyone who has watched how these kinds of armed groups operate in Nigeria knows very well. Where these weapons are coming from, who is funding this operation, and who benefits from the chaos being created in Ikwere communities is one that the government, both state and federal, has so far failed to answer publicly and convincingly. Now, let us talk about what happened on the ground in human terms, because it is easy to get lost in the political analysis and forget that real people are suffering. A couple, a husband and wife, were abducted during an attack in April 2026. Not just them, the leader of the local vigilante group in the area was also taken. Think about what that means for a community. The vigilante leader, the person they had chosen to protect them because the official security forces were either absent or insufficient, was targeted and kidnapped. That is not a random act. That is a message. It is a deliberate signal to the entire community that nobody is safe, that not even the people who stand up to protect others will be spared.
I'm sorry, my people, for this interjection. I just found a message somebody sent to me some couple of hours ago that Asari Dokubo was being captured by Fulani terrorists in uniform. In other words, known as repentant Boko Harams in Nigerian uniform. The reason, according to the guy, I'm reading what the guy told me. He said, and I quote, that the reason why Asari Dokubo was being apprehended is because he refused to follow the guidelines they gave to him, using his armies to buy the Biafrans. And I know, say, some couple of weeks ago, he came out and cried that the government of Imo State and, in fact, he said Nigerian government never pay him for complete good 9 months now that he have been doing the dirty job for them. So, since then, Asari Dokubo withhold his boys. I repeat, since then, Asari Dokubo withheld his boys not to go into the battlefield again, into bye-bye Biafrans. Are you hearing me now? So, while he do that, the Nigerian government then get angry and then start to track him. So, according to the information, say, zoo military terrorists in uniform, say na them apprehend Asari Dokubo. According to from different quarters. So some quarters don't talk say say na men on ground and men off ground. But this one now came to my inbox, my WhatsApp, working WhatsApp, the WhatsApp I use for this program. Please listen to the rest of the news.
It is a psychological warfare tactic as much as it is a physical one, and it is devastatingly effective at breaking the will of communities to resist. What makes the situation even heartbreaking is that the local vigilante groups did try to resist. They were not passive. They did not roll over. They stood up and fought, but they were overpowered. The reports are very clear on this point. The vigilante groups were outgunned. They had inferior weapons and significantly fewer men than the attackers. In any honest assessment, asking a local vigilante group armed with whatever they could put together to stand against what appears to be a well-equipped, well-organized, and numerically superior force is asking them to fight a war they cannot win. They deserve enormous credit for their courage, but courage alone does not change the balance of firepower. They did what they could with what they had, and it was not enough, through no fault of their own. The community leaders in Ikwere have been very direct and very public about their assessment of the situation. They are not trying to downplay this. They are not using diplomatic language designed to avoid offending powerful people. They are saying plainly that what is happening in their communities has exceeded the capacity of local security arrangements to handle. They are saying this is beyond them, and they are calling on the Rivers State government and the federal government to intervene with urgency and with seriousness. These are not the kinds of calls that community leaders make lightly. When an elder stands up and says openly that his community cannot protect itself, that is a moment of genuine desperation. That is a cry for help from people who have already exhausted every option available to them at the local level. One of the most chilling aspects of this entire situation is the geographic location of the affected communities. When people hear about rural violence in Nigeria, they sometimes unconsciously categorize it as a problem that is remote, that is happening somewhere far from the centers of economic and social life. But that is not the case here. The Ikwere communities that are under attack are located near Port Harcourt International Airport. Let that sink in for a moment. The International Airport, one of the primary entry and exit points for one of Nigeria's most economically significant states, an airport that is crucial for the oil and gas industry, for business travelers, for diaspora Nigerians coming home, for the movement of cargo and commerce. If armed groups can operate with impunity in forest zones that are this close to such critical infrastructure, then we are not talking about a peripheral security problem. We are talking about a threat to the economic heart of the South-South. And everyone, whether they live in Rivers State or not, should be asking very serious questions about how this has been allowed to reach this point. Now let us come to the central figure around whom this entire conversation is swelling, the man whose absence is as loud as any statement he has ever made publicly, Mujahid Asari Dokubo, the leader of the Niger Delta People's Volunteer Force, a man who built his entire public identity on the idea that he was a defender of his people, a warrior for the Niger Delta, a man with the weapons, the men, and the willingness to use force in the defense of his community and his region. Over the years, Asari Dokubo has made many dramatic statements. He has boasted of the strength of his fighters. He has issued threats. He has spoken about what would happen to anyone who dared threaten the peace of the Niger Delta. He has presented himself time and again as a figure of power and protection. So where is he now? Right now, at this very moment, while armed groups are occupying forests in communities that are part of his own region, while families are being kidnapped, while local vigilante leaders are being abducted, and the people are living in terror, where is Asari Dokubo? Various sources and political commentators have noted that he appears to have gone missing from public view. He's not making statements, he's not organizing mobilizing a response. He's not putting himself at the front of any effort to protect the people who, according to his own public posturing over many years, he exists to defend. The contrast between his past rhetoric and his current silence could not be more damning, and frankly, it could not be more damning. This is the moment that separates genuine leaders from performers. This is the moment that reveals whether the strength and commitment a person has been claiming all along is real, or whether it was always just theater. When there is no camera, no political rally, no press conference, no tribal dispute in which positioning himself as a defender helps him politically, what does Asari Dokubo do? Apparently, he disappears. And that disappearance is itself a statement whether he intends it to be or not. It tells the communities of River State something important about the kind of man he really is. It tells young people in the Niger Delta something important about the kind of protection being promised to them by armed leaders. It tells all of us watching from wherever we are, whether in Aba, in Enugu, in Lagos, in Port Harcourt, or in the diaspora, that when the bill comes due, some of the loudest voices go very quiet indeed. Some political commentators have gone further than simply noting his absence. They have drawn a direct line between Asari Dokubo's past behavior and what they see as his hypocrisy in this moment. The argument goes something like this. Here is a man who was very eager to insert himself into national conflicts, who spoke loudly about fighting in other regions, who aligned himself with political interests and made threats that had national implications. Yet, when the crisis comes literally to his doorstep, to his own people, to his own land, he has nothing to say and nothing to offer. The contrast, these commentators argue, is not just embarrassing, it is revealing. It shows that Asari Dokubo's armed posturing was never really about protecting his people. It was always, at its core, about his own power, his own political relevance, and his own access to influence and resources. You agree fully with that interpretation or not, it is hard to argue with the basic facts. The man made himself famous by talking about fighting and defending the Niger Delta. The Niger Delta is currently experiencing a serious security crisis, and he is absent. That is simply what the record shows. Let us also think about this from the perspective of the Biafran and South-South communities who have watched these dynamics play out over many decades. The people of this region have a long and painful history with armed leaders, militants, and those who use the language of community defense to accumulate personal power and wealth, while the actual communities they claim to represent continue to suffer. This is a pattern that is deeply familiar to anyone who has paid attention. A man emerges, he presents himself as a defender, he builds a following, he acquires weapons, he makes alliances with politicians, he becomes powerful. And then when the people actually need protection, when the crisis is not one that he can leverage for personal gain, he is nowhere to be found. Or worse, he becomes part of the problem himself. This pattern has robbed the South-South and the broader Biafran region of genuine, accountable, community-rooted leadership they deserve. It has allowed the federal government and various political actors to manipulate armed figures for their own ends, using the language of community defense as cover for purely political and economic agendas. And the communities themselves, the farmers, the mothers, the children, the local traders, they are the ones who pay the price when the armed leader who was supposed to protect them turns out to have been protecting only himself all along. What does genuine leadership in this crisis look like? It is worth asking that question directly, because criticism without any vision of what better looks like can quickly become empty. Genuine leadership in this moment would look like the state government of River State marshalling every security resource available to it and making it absolutely clear that no armed group, regardless of its origin, affiliation, or political connections, will be allowed to occupy any community in River State. It would look like the federal government responding to the calls from Ikwere community leaders with the kind of urgency and resource deployment that a threat to critical national infrastructure demands. It would look like community organizations and civil society groups providing support, documentation, and advocacy for the families who have been displaced, the couple who were kidnapped, the vigilante leader who was taken, and all of the other victims who are not being named in any of these reports, but who are suffering nonetheless. And yes, genuine leadership in this moment would also look like Asari Dokubo coming out publicly, explaining where he has been, what he has been doing, what his people can expect from him, and what role, if any, he intends to play in addressing the crisis. Even if his answer is that he no longer has the capacity or the will to play that role, that would be more honest and more respectful to his community than this deafening silence. The people of the Niger Delta deserve honesty from those who have placed themselves in positions of leadership, even if that honesty is uncomfortable. It is also worth zooming out and considering the broader national context in which this crisis is unfolding. Nigeria is a country that has been struggling with multiple overlapping security crises simultaneously for years, from the insurgency in the northeast to banditry and farmer-herder conflicts in the northwest and the middle belt, to separatist tensions in the southeast, to oil theft and pipeline vandalism in the south-south. The country is stretched thin. The security forces are under enormous pressure. State governments have varying levels of capacity and political will, and in this environment, it is very easy for a crisis like the one in Ikwere to fall through the cracks, to be deprioritized, to be managed through press statements rather than genuine intervention. But the people of Ikwere do not have the luxury of being deprioritized. They are living this crisis today. Every day that passes without meaningful intervention is another day of terror for families who should be safe in their own homes. Every day that passes is another day during which the armed groups in those forests are consolidating their control, reinforcing their positions, and possibly expanding their operations. Security vacuums, as history teaches us over and over again, do not stay static. They are filled, always, by whoever is willing to be most ruthless in claiming them. If the government does not fill the security vacuum in Ikwere land with legitimate force and the rule of law, something else will fill it, and it will not be anything that serves the interests of the people who live there. There is one more dimension to this story that we need to address, and it is the most sensitive one. Some of the commentary around this crisis has touched on ethnic and political narratives, including claims about the identity and affiliation of the armed groups operating in Ikwere. These claims are contested and they are not verified. They exist in the space where genuine security concerns meet ethnic anxiety and political point scoring, and that is an extremely dangerous space. It is dangerous because when security crises get filtered through ethnic lenses, they tend to escalate. Communities that might otherwise work together to address a shared threat begin to see each other as threats. Existing tensions get amplified, and the armed groups causing the actual harm get to continue their operations while everyone around them is distracted by arguments about ethnicity and identity. This does not mean that ethnic and political dimensions of security crisis should be ignored. They should not be. Understanding who is doing what and why, including any ethnic or political motivations, is essential for solving any complex security problem. But there is a difference between rigorous evidence-based analysis of those dimensions and the kind of inflammatory rhetoric that assigns collective guilt to entire ethnic groups based on the actions of criminal elements. The former serves the people. The latter serves the armed groups and the political actors who benefit from keeping communities divided and angry. It's not more division. It is not more finger-pointing along ethnic lines. It is a clear, coordinated, adequately resourced security intervention that prioritizes the safety of all residents, regardless of their ethnic background, combined with a genuine political will to address the underlying conditions, the poverty, the governance failures, the impunity, the history of armed group formation and political manipulation that create the environment in which these crises keep emerging. And what is needed from figures like Asari Dokubo and from every other person who has built a career on the claim that they are protectors of their people is accountability. The communities of the Niger Delta and the South-South do not need more protectors who are only present when there is political or personal gain to be had. They need leaders who show up when it is hard, when there is nothing to gain from showing up except the respect of the people you have sworn to serve. They need leaders who are honest about what they can and cannot do. They need leaders who direct resources and attention toward the actual needs of their communities rather than toward building their own profiles and power bases. The story of Asari Dokubo's absence in this moment of crisis is, in the end, a story that is much larger than any one man. It is a story about the kind of politics that the Niger Delta, the South-South, and indeed Nigeria as a whole has been subjected to for too long. It is a story about the weaponization of community identity for personal and political ends. It is a story about the gap between what leaders claim to stand for and what they actually do when the stakes are real and the cameras are not rolling. And it is ultimately a story about the resilience and the suffering of ordinary people who deserve so much better than what they have been given. The people of Ikwere who are living in fear tonight, the couple who are taken, the vigilante leader who was abducted, the farmers who cannot go to their farms, the children who are growing up knowing that the forest near their home is full of armed strangers. These are real human beings. Their pain is not a talking point. Their fear is not a political opportunity. They deserve to be safe. They deserve to be protected. They deserve a government that takes their calls seriously and a community leadership that does not go missing at the precise moment that it is needed most. So let us end where we began. Where is Asari Dokubo? That question matters not because Asari Dokubo himself is the center of the universe. He is not. It matters because his absence is symbolic of something much larger and much more important. The failure of a certain kind of political and armed leadership to deliver anything of real value to the communities it claims to represent. It matters because the people of River State, of the Niger Delta, of the South-South deserve to know whether the people who speak for them, who claim to fight for them, who build entire identities around protecting them are actually there when they are needed. And right now, the answer to that question, at least in the case of this man, seems to be no. He needs to come out. He needs to speak. He needs to explain himself to the people he has asked to trust him, to believe in him, to see him as a protector and a leader. Because if he cannot do that, then the communities of the Niger Delta need to begin asking themselves a very serious and very necessary question about who else they can put their trust in, who else can genuinely lead them, and what kind of future they want to build, one that is not dependent on the whims and the political calculations of armed men who show up when it is convenient and disappear when it is not. The forests of Ikwere are occupied. The people are afraid. The government needs to act now with urgency and with force of purpose.
With urgency and the force of purpose, and information have been shared. What is your own take over this matter? Are you joining us to ask the original question, where is Asari Dokubo? Anyway, Anna, do with this information whatever you may choose to. I have digested it and I keep it on my archives until when the time is right, then everybody is going to answer to the call of nature. Have a nice day. May the good Lord continue to bless us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Give me